Hello and welcome to this edition of Exclusive Interview, coming to you from the studios of 84 TV Radio Abuja, Nigeria. My name is Stanley Bentu. Now, on the 17th of November 2018, in a city called Wuhan, capital of Hubei district of China, a 55-year-old was admitted into hospital after experiencing severe acute respiratory distress. Now, shortly after that, 4 more men and 5 women suffered similar symptoms in what by this time had been identified as a novelty coronavirus. None of these patients, I must add, was patient 0. Now, we didn't know it back then, but our world was about to be turned upside down in an unprecedented way. Millions would fall sick. Hundreds of thousands of people would die. Economies would be left in ruins and stock markets ravaged. And our lives would never be the same again. Now, one of the most vulnerable groups that would be affected by this disruptive virus contains people aged over 70. And that is our focus on Exclusive Interview today. Let's have a look at this report.
The coronavirus disease, COVID-19 pandemic, has brought about unprecedented fear and uncertainty, especially among older adults. The elderly rely on social connection more than most, and they need it now more than ever. The elderly and retired sometimes need a helping hand, and they also often need to have people around them. With Nigeria emerging from a nationwide lockdown, vulnerable seniors could be more at risk now than ever before. Most of us are worried for our loved ones that are older and living with us or far away. They might face anxiety because they live alone, are on a fixed income or pension, no longer drive and cannot take public transport, or their routine health checkups are delayed. They could also have undiagnosed or poorly managed depression. For millions of elderly, COVID-19 has amplified the already existing worries. So, as we adjust to the new normal, what can young people do to support the older generation to feel safe and connected? Today, on Exclusive Interview, we speak to Dr. Asangaedem Akpan, Visiting Professor, Institute of Health, University of Cumbria, Honorary Clinical Associate Professor, University of Liverpool, and Consultant Geriatrician, Liverpool University Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust. He sheds more light on care for the elderly in a COVID-19 world.
And now we're being joined all the way from the United Kingdom by Dr. Akpan, who's a geriatric expert, to talk to us on COVID-19. Dr. Akpan, welcome to the show.
Hello, hi, so much. It's great.
Well, great to have you. Dr. Akpan, I just want to go straight to the conversation we're about to have. And I want to ask you about COVID-19 itself. What's the latest as far as coronavirus research is concerned? What more do we know about this virus?
Well, it's always good to maybe briefly start from what we know already, which is that it belongs to a group of viruses that affects animals and humans. And we've had something similar in the past that has affected us some years ago. But this new virus that's called coronavirus probably originated in China and obviously has spread to the rest of the world now. The new we know now about it is maybe more about the period to get the infection and for how long before you might get the symptoms, which can be up to 14 days, and in older people it can even get up to 17 days before they get symptoms. There is a lot of research ongoing at the moment, and as with research, this thing takes quite a while, including developing new vaccines. So while I not have much to report on the research front, there is a lot of work going on globally to try and get some answers and importantly, a vaccine that will work.
So as a recap, can you quickly give us a rundown of who is most at risk and what categories do they belong to?
Sure. So people who have any cardiovascular disease like heart failure or congenital heart diseases, people who have respiratory conditions, and people who have cancer, diabetes are at risk. And then importantly, age. People over the age of 70 are most at risk.
Okay, well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because that is the one area that we would like to focus on. In a country like Nigeria, I mean, I would like to volunteer myself as a case study. My mother is over 80 years old. Once upon a time, I remember when I was growing up, old people were only found, at least to the perception of those of us who are young, old people were only found in the villages. And only once in a year during Christmas would you ever get to see them. But the world has changed now. At least our world has changed. And now my mother lives with me, at least in the family home. And we also have a lot of other old people who are living with their families in different places, because these are old people who at least have lived the bulk of their lives in urban areas. And so they're not willing to go back to rural areas, and we're not even willing to send them back there because they have always been a part of their lives. So they live in our homes. And is it possible in a society where we do not have the welfare system or the old folks home system, is it possible to even keep our old parents safe from coronavirus?
I would say so, because even in a welfare system or places that have welfare systems, most older people do not stay in care homes. They actually stay on their own, or some live with their families. Mm-hmm. And with the particular situation you described for Nigeria, my advice would be that so we know that we have an older person really living with us, and we know that they are at risk. So the key then is for all of us, especially the ones, to practice some key preventive measures when we're outside the house and also when we're in, and we can go through that in detail. That is the condom for trying to protect not just ourselves, but our older relatives.
But we have a situation now where we live in the same space. We share the same space. And old people don't want to be kept away from their grandchildren. I have not visited my mother since the breakout of this pandemic. So I've not seen my mother in almost 3 months, and I think this would be true for a lot of Nigerians. So what do I need to do? How can I keep my mother happy and not missing me, and at the same time try to make sure that she is safe?
Okay, so there will be two pieces of advice. So let's take the first scenario you mentioned, where old relatives are actually living with younger people, because that's the arrangement they've had. Mm-hmm. And then the second are those older people who are living on their own with no contact with their relatives, because there will be different ways to manage that. Now, you told me that most people now have their older relatives living with them. So let's address that first. So the key to that is to see how can we reduce the chances of passing any infection to each other, including the older person. And that's this hand hygiene, because the virus comes through droplets from the nose or through the saliva. And then when we touch our nose and mouth and touch surface or touch people, then that's how we can spread it. But if we wash our hands regularly with soap and water, if we cough or sneeze and we do that into the elbow, then we reduce the chance of spreading the virus, even if we're living in the same household. For those who are living outside, and far away from us, like the example you gave of you and your mom, then that's very difficult because she's actually on one hand safe, because as younger people, we might even have the virus and not have any signs of infection, but we could give it to them. So the advice here in the United Kingdom has been that we should try as much as possible to shield them and not visit them or be in the same space with them. But quite rightly, the consequences that is that older people get isolated and get lonely. And even if they can be provided with all that they need, loss of contact with their friends and family can also have significant psychological impact on them. And that's very difficult for me to advise. I think that's something that a family can decide. And if they do visit, they need to try and keep at least one arm's length away, practice the hand hygiene, and if anyone is coughing or sneezing, to try very hard to do it into the elbow or away from the older person.
Big challenges there. Well, we'll have to take a break, but when we come back, we'll talk to Dr. Akpan about several other important things connected to how we can keep our older relatives safe. And this includes how do we prepare and how can we get information out to those older relatives and elder citizens that live in rural areas. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Where's your mask? Aren't you afraid of COVID-19?
Why not? I'm afraid. Why?
You're afraid. So how are you managing? Customers, plenty people will come. How do you know who has coronavirus, who doesn't have?
I don't know who. Before they enter, they wash their hands.
Okay.
Outside their hands.
You're not wearing mask. Aren't you scared of coronavirus?
I'm scared. I wear mask this morning. Since corona started, I've been wearing mask.
But you're not wearing now.
Hey, that allow me to breathe. I just let me relieve myself a little bit. I will still wear it. You see my car, you see inside the shop.
As the world faces the challenge of the coronavirus pandemic and governments around the world are racing against time, AD4 TV Radio thanks you all for doing your part to stop the spread of the disease. Be safe at home and practice hygiene. Protect yourself and others. Do not panic. Do not self-medicate. Listen to all preventive advice and stay at home, as well as maintain social distancing. Say no to fake news. Get authentic updates from the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, the Federal Ministry of Health, the NCDC, and of course, AD4 TV Radio, your credible and reliable channel. Please stay safe to save others.
Welcome back. This is exclusive interview coming to you live from AD4 TV Radio. My name is Stanley Bentu, and we've been talking to Dr. Asangaedem, who is an expert at geriatrics. The coronavirus has ravaged Nigeria, but how can we keep our older relatives safe? That's what we've been talking about. And my next question to Dr. Akpan is, what is the best way to prepare to disseminate information to those who are in the rural areas? Let's face it, Nigeria is a country where a lot of our people live in the villages. So how can we make sure that they have the right kind of information and that the older people in those areas can keep themselves safe?
It's a great question. And My response to that would be remembering my medical school days in Ibadan, where we had to do some work with rural villages. We used to connect with the community leaders, and through them, we would get simple messages across. Because we realized people were sometimes not so sure about strangers, people who they didn't know, they may not trust coming to them with messages. But if you got the community on board and explained to them why this was important, and then they then, on your behalf, shared that message with their constituents, this case would be older people, that message tended to be well received. And in addition to that, if there are local churches or mosques, then we can speak to the pastors or the imam and see if they wouldn't mind sharing that message at prayer time with people who come to worship, so that they can then share that with their older relatives.
Okay, well, here's another interesting situation. When you look at the trend of what's been happening across the world, you have lots of countries that have been easing down their lockdown protocols and also easing down social distancing based on the fact that they've either flattened the curve or they have this trend where infections are lowering. Nigeria is easing down and also opening up its economy at a time when infections are going up. What are your thoughts on this?
So this is a very difficult thing. Each country is trying to make a balance between the risk of the COVID-19 disease and its economy collapsing. And I can imagine if trying to make that decision, it's very difficult, and my country is trying to make a balance and come out with what's best based on trying to balance those two. But what we can do as in terms of any country this is done, and that includes Nigeria, is there are certain things we can do to reduce our risk of getting the infection or spreading it. And one is when we're outside, especially in crowded spaces where we cannot keep an arm's length from someone, to wear a face mask, simple cloth mask, because that reduces our chances of us passing infection to someone else. And this is wearing a mask, is the risk of passing it on to us. So it is both an individual measure and a public health measure. And we encourage people to try and wear those face masks. So if we're in a taxi, in a bus, in a crowded market space, it would be reasonable to encourage people to wear face masks. The other key thing, as I said, this infection is through the nose and mouth. And there is always this reflex tendency for us to touch our nose and mouth. So washing our hands frequently with soap and is important. If we can remember and avoid touching our nose and mouth as we can, and trying to keep an arm's length from cells, if it's possible.
Now, Doctor, if I can just jump, let me just jump in here. Yes, wear masks, and everybody seems to be on the positive side on that. But there is a challenge with this, because in certain states, as a result of the governors of those states trying to implement social distancing measures, you have maybe the road safety, the police, and other security operatives telling people that, oh, even if you're in your car and you're in an air-conditioned environment, you must wear your mask, because this is what the government is trying to enforce. But is it safe, really, to wear a mask while you're driving a car? Should the operatives be checking whether people who are driving cars are wearing masks, or is there a protocol? How should we wear masks? When and where should we do that?
Okay. The first thing out, when you are with a large population like a country and you're trying to send a message, The easier, less complicated the better. And some countries have chosen to do a blanket directive where everybody has to wear a face mask. So, for example, in China and South Korea, everybody has to wear a face mask, irrespective of where you are. As soon as you leave your house, you have to wear a mask. Driving, walking, open space, closed space, you wear a mask. In England, the approach has been less prescriptive, and if you are out in the road walking where there are not many people, you do not need to wear a face mask. But if you're on public transport or in the
For
supermarket,
Nigeria, what do you think would work for us?
I think I would to the government's directive and be reassured that there is no harm in a mask driving.
Okay, no harm in a mask while driving?
No, because it covers your mouth and your nose.
So
and you
what
can
about
breathe,
those
unless
who
you
tell
have...
what about those who tell you, and I think I would count myself in that group, that when I drive, I want to be focused and I have an air-conditioned car, and if I'm alone in that car, I don't want to have to wear a mask.
So what I am trying to be very careful is I do not want to give a personal opinion that will be interpreted and might go against the national government's directive. I can tell you what we do here in the UK.
Okay.
And if you're in your car, alone or with your or people from your same household, we do not wear masks. And that doesn't contravene any public health directive. You decrease the risk of infection because you're from the same household or you are alone in your car.
Okay, so you don't pose a danger to one another. One last question, Doctor.
No.
How can one reduce the risk of getting COVID-19? I mean, what practical steps can you give us, including hand washing? Everybody is washing their hands these days, but are we doing it right?
Wash your hand, yes. Wash your hand to customer. After attending to customer, you wash your hand. Then use the last water and clean up. And I'll do it.
Yes. So that's number one. Hand hygiene, washing with soap and water. And that's important because, as I said, we tend to touch surfaces, doorknobs, and you don't know who else has touched it. You don't know if they've got the virus, and the virus can survive for hours to days on those surfaces. And that's why it's so important that we wash our hands regularly. Wear the face mask, and if you can, maintain a social distance of at least 1 meter from others. And then the other bit that I didn't mention is what happens if you do get the symptoms. So if you get a fever, or you get a new drop, or the new thing that I noticed in some people in here, you lose your sense of taste or smell, then we advise you to self-isolate in your own house for at least 14 days. Now, I know that this may not be for a lot of people, but where at all it's possible, you will a service to the person because you will reduce the risk of transmitting the virus to others.
So when we are washing our hands, do you have tips for us? How can we effectively do that?
Well, if you want, I can demonstrate it to you.
Please demonstrate. I think we would need that.
Okay. So let's assume I've taken some soap and I put it in my hand like that. I put the soap, and then I do this. See? Yeah. And then I do that again. And then this way. Yeah. Then rub my
And when you
tongue.
do that, what are you trying to do?
Well, I'm just trying to make sure I'm washing all the surfaces, that I'm not missing any bit. And also it prolongs the hand wash. You need to wash for at least 20 to 40 seconds. And then do that.
That's
And
to
then
really
just
get
rinse
into
under
in
the
between the
water.
fingers.
You get in between the fingers, you get everywhere into all the nooks and crannies,
Between
and you
the
make sure
thumbs.
you wash. That's right.
And after that, you rinse, and
You
you're good to go.
rinse, and then dry it, and dry it with your towel or with a hand towel.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Akpan. I think I've been very educated through this experience. It's been a pleasure having you on exclusive interview, and we look forward to having you again soon.
It's been a pleasure for me too. Thank you very much.
A very big thank you to Dr. Akpan for that interesting conversation. And I learned quite a bit. And some of the things I learned, I want to share with you, especially since I am one of those Nigerians that has a parent who is over 70. As a matter of fact, my mother is roughly a little over 80 years old. So how can I keep her safe? But the interesting thing is, as I keep her safe, I can also keep myself and my children safe. So he talked about hand hygiene, washing with soap and water, because we tend to touch surfaces. And the interesting thing is we do so even without knowing it. So sometimes when you're walking up the stairs, try not to touch the railings. But if you do, make sure that you have your hand sanitizer handy so that you can keep your hands clean. Don't forget that the virus can survive for hours and even days on surfaces. So when you're washing your hands, wash for at least 20 seconds. You should always make sure that you make use of face masks. Well, some of them are made out of cloth, others made out of, well, some of those things that the professionals use. It doesn't matter what you use, but if the people that you talk to use face masks and you also do, what it means is that you are saying to that person, I care for your safety, and that person is saying to you that he cares or she cares about your safety. So use face masks as much as possible. Maintain social distancing. These are the basics that we must remember. You must remember to stay at least a meter from other people. How much is a meter? Well, you can estimate it to be about 6 feet between you and the person who is closest to you. And it's not just about you, don't forget, it's also about your older relatives. Now, if you get symptoms like fever or dry cough, you're sneezing, you're advised to stay indoors for at least 14 days. And perhaps you should also give a call to the Nigeria Center for Disease Control and maybe get a test for coronavirus. And that's it for exclusive interview for today. And until we come your way again with another interesting episode, thank you for stopping by.